My name is Rob Dick, and this is The Human Hunters. I started this podcast and website to allow you to step inside the investigation with me and help bring closure to the victims' families out there. Solving a case is like putting a puzzle together, and every unsolved case is just missing pieces. By exploring these cases from the inside, the goal is to allow those out there that have information to come forward with their piece to the puzzle so that we can put all the pieces together to bring closure. Please, if you have any information, no matter how small it may seem to you, contact the Human Hunters. In this episode, I will give you an overview of a case that has emotionally and totally consumed the last 21 years of my life. A case that started out with the missing person and continued to the building of a relationship with a killer, all in the name of closure and bringing victims home to their families. A case that has many unique characteristics, from multiple killers to having one of the largest victim counts in the United States. On Friday, November 13th, 1998, Cindy Vanderheiden, who had just turned 25 on November 4th, was out with friends for a night of bar hopping, starting at a local bar in Clements, California, where she lived with her family. Cindy started at the Old Corner Saloon in Clements and closed out in the Linden Inn, a bar that was owned by her father, located in Linden, California. It was a night of drinking and singing karaoke with friends until she later vanished in the early morning hours. On the morning of November 14th, Cindy's father, John Vanderheiden, spots Cindy's car parked in the parking lot of the Glenview Cemetery around the corner from the family home in Clements, California. John then called his wife, Terry, to ask why Cindy's car was parked in the cemetery, and Cindy was nowhere to be found. Neither John nor Terry can remember hearing Cindy come home the night before, and that she was to leave for work early that morning. Terry stated that she thinks she remembers Cindy pulling into the driveway in the early morning hours, but is not sure if she came into the house or not. Either way, by now Cindy should be at work in Lodi. John pulls into the parking lot, checks the car, only to see her purse inside the car. Finding that out of the ordinary for Cindy, she would never leave her car behind, nor her purse. And the fact that it was only parked about a block away from the house. If something was wrong with the car, she could have easily walked back to the house to notify them. So he notified law enforcement. This is the point where I got involved in the case. It was a local news story, and they were asking for volunteers to search for anything that would lead them to Cindy. I began volunteering for searches and met the Vanderheidens. The emotions involved were almost unbearable. I have no right trying to explain the feelings of someone who has a loved one missing in their family, as I do not have anyone missing in my family. However, I can say that I've never before been overcome with such emotion and the heartbreaking, helpless feelings watching a family try to overcome such an empty hole of emotion because of not knowing what happened to their loved one. At this time in my life, I was bounty hunting full time, chasing people that failed to appear in court. I was working with Leonard Padilla. We located the people that didn't want to be found, and we found everyone. So it was kind of a surreal situation that a person could just vanish. I mean, it wasn't like today where that's all we see on TV with shows of crime and people going missing. But I knew I had to make a promise that I would find Cindy and bring her home. At this time, law enforcement had already begun looking into a couple of persons of interest, Lauren Herzog and Wesley Shermantine Jr. The pair had grown up across the street neighbors, meeting each other at around age 4, and once they met, they were forever tied together like brothers. If you saw one, you'd usually see the other. They grew up together, eventually moved out and lived together. They worked together, hunted together, and killed together. The reason law enforcement was looking at them as a person of interest was because Shermantine was connected to another missing girl, Chevelle Wheeler, who went by Chevy, and she had vanished on October 16, 1985, 13 years earlier. On the morning of October 16, 1985, Chevy was dropped off at Franklin High School in Stockton, California, by her mother, Paula Wheeler. As Chevy got out of the vehicle, she told her mother that she loved her, and it was unknown at the time to Paula, but she would never see her daughter again. A couple of Chevy's friends knew that she had planned on skipping school that morning and going up into the hills of San Andreas, where the Shermantine family had a cabin in the hills. At this time, Chevy was 16, still in high school, and Shermantine was 18. He'd already graduated high school. There were several witnesses that identified both Shermantine and his truck as the vehicle that Chevy got into that morning at Franklin High School. Later in the day, when Chevy did not return home from school, the Wheelers contacted law enforcement, and interviews with witnesses led them to the Shermantine property in San Andreas, California. On the remote parcel located off of Leonard Road in San Andreas, there was a small, what they called a hunting cabin on the property. Law enforcement conducted a search of the grounds and the cabin. Inside the cabin, law enforcement located several drops of blood. Shermantine claimed it was animal blood because it was a hunting cabin, and in 1985, law enforcement did not have the technology to be certain that the blood was human, or even Chevy's for that matter, and the case stayed a missing persons case. On February 15, 1999, a mother, daughter, and foreign exchange student go missing while they were visiting Yosemite National Park, and the story gained worldwide media coverage. Law enforcement was looking for anyone that could be involved. Shermantine and Herzog were looked at as persons of interest because, just as in the other cases, there were women missing. Also, the pair had a connection to the area as well as to the Cedar Lodge where the 3 women were staying. While the Yosemite story was in the front of the media, Leonard Padilla received a call from an inmate at a local jail. This female also happened to be a friend of Shermantine and Herzog. She said, "You know who killed those 3 women, don't you?" It was Wes and Lauren, and they threw the bodies down a mine shaft like they did with the rest of them. That was a very strange call to receive, and we passed the information on to law enforcement at the time. Now, if you followed the Yosemite case, there was a maintenance guy at the Cedar Lodge, a man by the name of Kerry Stainer, who was arrested for the rape and murder of Yosemite nature guide Joey Armstrong. And then, once in custody, he admitted that he also killed the 3 women in Yosemite. Stainer has since been convicted and sentenced to death for the 4 murders. During the same time, at the beginning of 1999, Shermantine's car had been repossessed and was given to law enforcement. Even though law enforcement had searched it before, now CSI could process it for evidence from bumper to bumper. While most were focusing on the Yosemite case, law enforcement was able to find a small amount of blood on the post of the headrest for the passenger seat, along with some blood in the trunk. It appeared there was an attempt to have it cleaned away.
Tell me, what are the possibilities of Cindy's blood being in your trunk?
I don't know that it is Cindy's blood.
We're telling you, it's 169 million to
Law
one.
enforcement had better technology along with new DNA technology. Samples were taken and tests revealed through DNA that Cindy's blood was both on the passenger seat headrest post and in the trunk of the Shermantine's car. Additionally, the blood from the cabin was tested again, and it was determined it contained Chevy's blood. Lauren Herzog was originally questioned back in November when Cindy Vanderheiden first went missing, and Herzog only stated that he had talked to her in the bar that night. But now Herzog was brought back in for questioning, and this time the detectives were armed with the knowledge of Cindy's blood in Shermantine's vehicle and Chevy's blood in the cabin. Since Herzog was Shermantine's lifelong friend, they wanted to confront him first, and over several different interviews, that's exactly what happened. Herzog made a comment under his breath that he's glad this is finally over. All the murders, all the bodies. The detectives weren't sure what he was talking about, but they're about to find out. They asked, let's talk about Cindy first. She just went missing last November. Herzog said he knew Cindy because he used to date her sister Kim, and he remembers Cindy had come into the bar that night. Lauren goes into the story that he and Shermantine were out drinking at the Linden Inn, a bar located in Linden, California. He said Cindy had approached them and she wanted to party. Both Shermantine and Herzog had been drinking and doing meth most of the night. A plan was made that after the bar closed, they would all meet at the Glenview Cemetery in Clements. Herzog stated that he rode with Shermantine in his car over to the cemetery after the bar closed, and then shortly later Cindy showed up in her car. She got out of her vehicle and got into the passenger seat of Shermantine's car. Said he was sitting in the back seat. Shermantine then just drove off with her in the car. Cindy wanted to go back to her car, but Shermantine kept driving. He then began grabbing her by the hair and trying to force her to do some sexual stuff while he was driving. Cindy began to fight, and Shermantine backhanded her in the face, bloodying her nose, as they drove out to a dirt road away from anything. Once out on the dirt road, Shermantine got her out of the car and raped her right there beside the car. She called out to Herzog, calling him Slim. Help me, Slim. Herzog responded with, just don't test him. He said then he heard that click that he's heard so many times before. He said, don't kill her, Wes. But he knew what was going to happen. Shermantine then slit her throat. She fought it, he said. She was strong, a lot stronger than he was. But Shermantine was on her. He held her down and then said, just let it come naturally. He just held her down till she bled out. He's a cold-blooded killer. The detectives asked him what he was doing while all this was going on. He stated he was just sitting there. He was drunk, he was high, and he couldn't do anything. He said, hell, he'd kill him too if he tried to stop him. Then Shermantine made him get out of the car, and he helped him roll her in a blanket and put her in the trunk. She was dead when she went into the trunk, but that's all he knows. He doesn't know where she is. Herzog then stated that, man, this was so heavy. He wondered if he should speak to an attorney or something. The detectives kind of glossed over it by saying, I don't know, do you think you need an attorney for anything? We're just trying to talk to you about Shermantine. The detectives then asked what the other murders he was talking about. Herzog then related a story where Shermantine and him were coming back from Tahoe back in 1984 to 86. And he came across a male on the side of the road. Herzog said that Shermantine turned around as if he was going to see if he was okay. But when Shermantine got out of the vehicle, he just went up to him and started beating him. He then went back to the truck and got his shotgun, and he beat him with the butt of the shotgun in the head until he then shot him. Herzog said he just robbed him and killed him. I mean, the guy was so drunk, he didn't have to do that. Shermantine said, no, we got to kill him. Shermantine then stole the $45 he had. The detectives asked, he would kill someone for $45? And Herzog stated he would kill someone for less than that. We're dealing with a cold-blooded killer. The detectives knew the incident that Herzog was talking about. It was an unsolved homicide of Henry Howell that occurred on September 1st, 1984. Howell had been drinking and pulled over on Highway 88 to get sick beside his car. They knew that someone had beat and shot him, killing him in a violent death, but no one knew who did it, and now they were getting intimate details from someone that had to have been there. The detectives asked Herzog what else. He replied, well, there were those two guys on Daggett Road. Again, the detectives already knew the incident he was talking about was an unsolved homicide back in November 28, 1984, where two men were found on the ground outside their car. Both men had been shot in the face with shotguns and laid next to their vehicle. Herzog stated that one night back in 84 to 86, he and Sherman were driving around in Sherman's truck and came upon a car at the end of Daggett Road. Sherman asked him, hey, do you want to rob him? Well, we always had our shotguns with us. So Herzog said, sure. They got out of the truck, and Herzog said he couldn't believe it. Sherman went up to the driver's side and shot the driver right in the face. Then he came back and grabbed his shotgun and went up and unloaded into the passenger right in the face. He then pulled the guys out of the car, took a knife out, cut their pockets open, and stole the little bit of money that they had. Then there was Robin Armtrout. Again, detectives knew of this unsolved homicide that occurred September 4th, 1985. Robin Armtrout was found dead by a canal in a vineyard, naked and stabbed 46 times. It was unknown at the time that Sherman and Herzog lived less than a mile down the road. Herzog stated that the two of them had picked up Robin out by Delmar Park and drove her out to the vineyard, where Sherman just went off and started to assault her and then began stabbing her. And then they just left her there. Herzog then stated, well, there was a hunter in Utah. The detectives were taken back. Utah, they asked. Herzog stated, yeah, they had hunted all over the western states. And one time they were in Utah hunting, and they saw this hunter over on another hill. Herzog said, man, Sherman just pulled up his rifle, fired a shot, and dropped the guy. So we just left. The detectives left the room, called Utah law enforcement, and confirmed that there was in fact an unsolved homicide of a hunter in 1994. When the detectives returned for questioning, Herzog said he'd had enough. He'd already said too much, and Herzog was then taken into custody. Detectives went out and took Wesley Sherman into custody for questioning. Sherman didn't have much to say, stating that he didn't kill anyone and that he didn't believe there was any of the victim's blood in his vehicle, like the detective said. And if there was, he had nothing to do with it and didn't know how it would have got there. When confronted with Herzog and what he was saying, Sherman's only comment was, well, if he knows about it, then he must have done it. And then he asked for a lawyer. The detectives then took Sherman into custody. On March 18, 1999, both Lauren Herzog and Wesley Sherman were taken into custody and booked on the murders that Herzog talked about, along with Cindy Vanderheiden and Chevy Wheeler. At this point, I was completely obsessed by the case. I mean, I'm a very factual person. In my mind, all I could think of was that based off of what just Herzog had talked about, we have to remember that two 18-year-old friends killed 6 people without even blinking an eye back in 84 to 85. And then what are we to believe? They went on vacation till 1998? There was just no way. Serial killers only get braver and bolder. The only thing that stops a serial killer is death and incarceration. So therefore, what happened between the early 80s and 1998? How many cases are they really connected to? Cindy's father, John, had set up Cindy Search that had a tip line, and the family took notes, filling a binder with tips. Cindy's sister Kim set up a website for Cindy Search, and I took over running the website. I became very close to the Vanderheidens. I could see their pain that they were going through, and that became the driving force to continue searching and never give up. I do not have anyone missing in my family, so I do not have the right to try to explain the pain I saw and witnessed. But I know that it has to be brought to an end so that family and friends can move on with their own lives and receive closure. As a bounty hunter and private investigator, we found everyone, even searching for people that didn't want to be found. So we just had to find her. I made a promise to the family that I would find Cindy. We became a close group of family and friends that would spend all our free time after work and on the weekends, searching, following up any tips that would come into Cindy Search. We searched all over the properties, covering 3 different counties, by foot, by horseback, and by ATV, exploring hillsides, mine shafts, and wells. And going over the tips that came in on the tip line, there was one where Shermantine was found coming off a property and was confronted by the owners right after Cindy went missing. Shermantine stated that he was just dumping trash down a mine shaft. We contacted the person with the tip, and they gave us directions to the mine shaft. When we went out, we dropped a underwater camera down about 70 feet to the bottom. Now, at the time, with limited technology, and honestly the lack of really knowing what we were doing at the time, we were only viewing a feed on a monitor and taking turns at staring at the monitor while one person was moving the camera in a line across the approximately 25-foot gaping hole of the downward shaft. During this time, another member of our group was filming the entire process and occasionally would film the monitor screen. And that's where this video came from. It wasn't seen while it was taken and viewed through the monitor. It was actually saw later when we observed it on the tape and were reviewing. That's why the video is so short. Obviously, if we'd seen it at the time, we could have positioned the camera better to get a longer, more detailed view. Once it was observed, we notified the San Joaquin Sheriff's Department, and they responded to take possession of the tape. The detective took the tape to the medical examiner for viewing, and the detective called us back and stated that those are human remains, and we would need to take them out to the mine shaft location in the morning. Leonard Padilla, who I worked with at the time, thought it would be a good idea for the media to be present to document the entire incident. So the local media was already present at the site of the mine shaft when we arrived with law enforcement. That immediately started out bad, because as we were explaining how and why and how we filmed what was at the bottom of the mine shaft, the media continued to ask questions of law enforcement as to why it took us to get them out there, and why, since they knew of the tip, they never followed up on it. I could already see where this was going. San Joaquin County Sheriffs brought out their search and rescue, who had their own camera, and they began dropping it into the shaft and watching the monitor. Now, there was one distinct difference between our camera and theirs. Ours filmed parallel to the ground, and theirs filmed straight down to the ground. Because the depth of the shaft was so dark, when we dropped our camera in, we couldn't see anything until it hit the bottom. Then we'd see the silt kind of float up in front of the camera, and we would drag it along the bottom, which was how we got our video. Theirs faced straight down, so they would drop it down the shaft, raise it up a few inches, drop it back down, and just kind of move along the bottom going up and down. As the day turned into the late afternoon, the search and rescue officers concluded that there was nothing down there, and that we must have filled something like a squirrel or something at the bottom of that shaft. Law enforcement picked up their property, and the property owners were noticed that everyone had to leave, and the media and all of us were ordered off the property and advised that we could not return to the property again. I'm going to kind of leave this part of the story right here. We'll return to discuss this incident in a future podcast. John Vanderheiden had offered to the public a $20,000 reward for information leading to the successful recovery of his daughter Cindy. Shermantine, while sitting in custody, learned of the reward and asked the media to tell John that if he gave his sons the reward money, he would tell where Herzog put his daughter. This angered John, as he was not going to give any money to one of the persons involved in making his daughter disappear. Leonard Padilla then put out to the media and reached out to Shermantine that he would pay the $20,000 if he would give him the information as to where Cindy was located. This did not make Cindy's father happy at the time and kind of put me in the middle, but I explained to John, just let Leonard play his own game with Shermantine, as it might lead us to your daughter. Shermantine's lawyers eventually put a stop to any further negotiations over a deal to locate a body, as Shermantine was facing a charge of murder for the disappearance of Cindy. Then came the trial. The case was tried under the jurisdiction of San Joaquin County under a new law where one jurisdiction may prosecute different counties' cases as one case. This case already involved Alpine County, Calaveras County, and San Joaquin County, and though the trials were held separately for Herzog and Shermantine, there was a change of venue for both, and both trials were to be heard in Santa Clara County. Again, at this time I was so obsessed with these cases, I stayed out in Santa Clara with the families, and we went to trial almost every day, listening to witnesses and information presented on the cases. While in Santa Clara, I met another family, Joan Shelley and her other daughter, Michelle. Her daughter, Joanne Hobson, had also gone missing. She went missing on 8/29 of 85, even before Chevy went missing, and she was never seen again. Her daughter's case was only a runaway case at the time, but Joan was there to listen as well, because deep in her heart she knew that Herzog and Shermantine had something to do with her daughter never coming home. The trial led to both Shermantine and Herzog being convicted. Shermantine would be sentenced to death for 4 murders, Paul Kavanaugh and Howard King on Daggett Road, Chevelle, Chevy Wheeler, and Cindy Vanderheiden, even without their bodies being found. Shermantine would be sent to San Quentin's death row in San Quentin, California. Herzog would be sentenced to 78 years to life for the murders of Cindy Vanderheiden, Paul Kavanaugh, and Howard King, with an accessory to murder of that of Henry Howell, then being acquitted on Robin Armtrout. Herzog would then be sent to High Desert State Prison in Susanville, California. On the day of sentencing for Shermantine, myself and the families were present in the courtroom. I will never forget, it was an eerie day sitting in that courtroom, and you could feel that it was filled with emotion. Today is the day where Shermantine will hear the judge tell him that he will be sentenced to death for his crimes, and a day the families will have the opportunity to express their feelings toward him and partially be able to close a door that for years they've waited for. The Wheelers and the Vanderheidens were there to make comment, as was Joan Shelley. Shermantine's attorney objected to Joan making a statement, as she was not a part of the present case, and she was not able to speak at the victim impact statements. After the Wheelers and the Vanderheiden spoke, it was Shermantine's turn to address the courtroom. Shermantine raised his voice and stated, "He did not kill these people, and you have all lied. You people are going to learn in the long run that you screwed with the wrong person." He then turned toward the audience and he said, "Mrs. Hobson, I don't know who you are, but I do know that Lauren Herzog went out with your daughter. Lauren Herzog has told me where he put her." At that moment, the courtroom gasped, and Joan broke down in tears, hearing what she had always feared, that her daughter was dead. Shermantine continued on saying he was getting blamed for what Herzog did, and that he has never killed anyone. And then it was over. Shermantine was sentenced to death. After it was over, there was a feeling of mixed emotions. The families were happy that Shermantine was sentenced to death, but that did not bring their daughters home. The searching must still go on. Someone now has to pay for this. But there was still no closure. I could not believe the feelings that were tearing me up inside. I spoke with DA Thomas Testa after the trial. I asked him, now what? He said, what do you mean? He said, where do we go from here? Is there now going to be a trial for Joan and her daughter? And he said, no. What about Cindy and Chevy? We haven't brought them home. For the first time, I felt a hole inside my chest. Not as bad as what the victims' families felt, but for me, coming from a law enforcement background, I felt helpless, like them. DA Testa said, I know, it sucks. The system has put him away, but that's it. He said, don't get me wrong, if there's something to prosecute in the future, I will, but for now, this is the best that can happen. The bad guy is put away and justice has been served. I couldn't take it. The families were still in pain. There was no final closure. I know that the victims cannot be brought back, but they have to be brought home. There was this point in time where I felt I have to do something. The system is failing, and no one is looking anymore. There has to be more cases, more victims, and we have to bring them all home. I became even more obsessed, searching for related cases that fit the profile, where a person vanished during the times that they were active in the early 80s to March 18, 1999, where they were put into custody. I dove in and spent any waking hour researching cases and looking for missing persons. I started coming up with nearly 100 cases that could be part of the bigger picture, and that was only in California. Remember, they traveled all the western states. But the numbers were overwhelming, and I wanted to just focus on California for now. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't believe they killed everyone and are responsible for all the missing in California, but I didn't want to leave anyone out, like Joanne was left out, having her case stay a runaway missing persons case for years, even after one of the two subjects stated in open court that she was in the boneyard with the rest. The way I looked at this mission was, if the similarities were in the case, it goes on the pile. And if through investigation we find someone else is responsible for making that person disappear, oh well, at least that case is solved. Over the next couple of years, I would be compiling cases and beginning investigations, not forgetting we still must find Cindy, Chevy, and now Joanne and bring them home. Then in 2004, it felt like the world was turned upside down. An appeals court overturned Lauren Herzog's conviction, and he was set to be freed from prison. In the next podcast, we'll explain how that happened and where it went from there. Remember, this is the Human Hunters.